My name is Sam Taylor, and I'm a Blackburn student. And it's my privilege to be able to introduce our speakers for this session, each of whom I have very much respect for and hold in high regard. So our moderator today is Ms. Katie Boyd Britt, a native of Enterprise, Alabama, and a graduate of the University of Alabama with a degree in political science and blunt liberal arts. Katie's career began in Washington, D.C. as Senator Richard Shelby's deputy press secretary and later press secretary, serving as the head of the department at only the age of 23. In 2015, she took a leave of absence to become Senator Shelby's deputy campaign manager and communications director, before rejoining him in 2016 as his chief of staff. Katie was then selected as president and CEO of the Business Council of Alabama in December 2018, where she continues to work to build a stronger business community. Our three panelists today include Robert Aderholt. On January 3rd, 2019, Congressman Robert B. Aderholt was elected and took the oath of office for his 12th term representing Alabama's amazing 4th Congressional District. Congressman Robert Aderholt serves on the powerful House Committee on Appropriations, which has jurisdiction over the funding of the operation of the federal government. He serves as the ranking member on the Subcommittee of Commerce, Justice, and Science, and he is an advocate for a more transparent and more accountable and more oversight to the appropriations process. Prior to his election to the United States Congress, Congressman Aderholt served as assistant legal advisor to Governor Bob James, as well as municipal judge in the city of Haleville, Alabama. Representative Aderholt is a graduate of Birmingham Southern College and the Cumberland School of Law at Stanford University. We also have with us Mayor Tommy Battle. Now in his 3rd term, Mayor Tommy Battle is dedicated to creating jobs and diversifying Huntsville's economic base. Born in Birmingham in 1955, Mayor Battle moved to Huntsville in 1980 after graduating with a business degree from the University of Alabama. 4 years later, he was elected to the city council, where he served as the finance chair. His successful career as an entrepreneur and businessman, as well as nearly 30 years of community service, effectively prepared him to be the city's chief executive, recruiter, and champion of Huntsville's future. We also have with us the Honorable Joe Bonner. Former Congressman Joe Bonner is currently serving as Chief of Staff to Governor Kay Ivey. He previously served as Vice Chancellor for Economic Development for 5 years for the University of Alabama system, as well as Interim Director for 1 year for the Tuscaloosa County Industrial Development Authority. For more than a decade, Congressman Bonner served as the representative for Alabama's 1st Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives, where he was first elected to the 108th Congress in November 2002. He was successfully reelected 5 additional times, and in the 112th Congress, he served as the chairman of the Ethics Committee. Mr. Bonner earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from the University of Alabama in 1982. And again, I want to thank everyone who's joined us to listen to these 4 amazing individuals. And I want to thank them also for joining us to speak. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Katie Boyd Britt.
Sam, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing all of us to be with you, for the generous introduction, and for all that y'all are doing at the Blackburn Institute to not only create dialogue, but make this state better for years to come. So we certainly appreciate it. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll tell you, it's an honor to be with these gentlemen. I have had an opportunity in my various career paths to work with each of them in different roles. And I will tell you, we have just the best of the best on this call. And I know we all look forward to learning from them and how they have really shown true leadership throughout this pandemic. So before we get started in what's going on currently, we kind of wanted to know from you, and we heard a little bit about each of your backgrounds, but what in your background kind of do you feel like most prepared you for the year 2020? And Mayor Battle, we're going to start with you. Oh, and you're muted. We got to
There you go. That's better.
There you go.
I gave a great speech one time, and I went all the way through it and got finished, and they said, you're muted, you're muted. So it wasn't as good as I thought it was. You know, I think the thing that got us ready for this particular COVID-19 coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, was the H1N1 flu. A lot of people don't remember 10 years ago, H1N1 was a virus that was coming very similar. We had very similar intel on it, just like we had on the coronavirus. And it was coming out of Mexico. It was supposed to have a 20% lethality, or 20% of the people would die from it. And at that time, we were trying to deal with that. The president at the time had suggested that we read the book Pandemic, and I went out and got a copy and read the book, and you know, and it was a fascinating book, and it parallels a lot of what we see today. Some of today's technology has kept us from getting into as deeply into some of the problems they had in back in the early 1900s is what we are having today. But the book Pandemic parallels a lot of what we're seeing right here. H1N1 was a great community test for us, because we closed schools for three or 4 days, which was almost unheard of at that time. And you know, and we started off, we closed schools, I think, on a Tuesday. We went through the weekend. When the weekend came in, people were getting the virus, and our intel from our doctors in the community was that, you know, this is a bad virus, but it's not as bad as we thought it would be. By that Sunday, I'll never forget Saturday, we were sitting there, and most everybody had come to the same conclusion we had, that, you know, it was a bad virus, but not as bad as we thought it was. And the CDC was on the line, and CDC said, well, we can't stand everybody down right now, because the president just went on TV and said that he was going to do everything he could to stop the spread of this, and it would make him look like he didn't know what was going on. So we said, well, when can we stand it down? They said, we'll do it Sunday night. But it was a fascinating process to go through, and we did the same thing here that we have done during this. Back then, we had daily news conferences. That really helps out, lets people know what you're doing. But having those daily news conferences, having communication between all your partners, your health partners in the area, that set us up for when this one happened. We could kind of follow that same playbook and do some of the same things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll tell you, Congressman Bonner, you probably obviously remember that from your time in DC and here. And I also know you have dealt with, whether it be hurricanes or tornadoes or oil spills. I mean, take your pick. What in your background has most prepared you for 2020?
Well, Katie, clearly the hurricanes in 2004, Hurricane Ivan, and in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, as Sam was so generous in saying in his introduction, when I worked in Congress, I was representing Southwest Alabama, down in the Mobile, Baldwin County area. And so when you live on the coast, you know, you are always susceptible to Mother Nature's wrath. But I was finishing up my first term when Hurricane Ivan hit. Ivan was really for Alabama, not just on the coast, but it went as far as into Montgomery, into central Alabama. Ivan was our Katrina. But then a year later, we had Katrina, and we had a lot of damage. We had downtown Mobile had 16 feet of water from the storm surge of Hurricane Katrina. We certainly didn't have the damage that New Orleans or the Mississippi coast had. And then you throw in that oil spill that you remember well back in 2010. Congressman Aderholt certainly does. Mayor Battle. Now, the oil spill was something that perhaps the lessons from it have been as helpful as anything, because we had never had anything like that before. And while Mayor Battle is exactly right, H1N1, and we've had pandemics. We had a pandemic 100 years ago, but none of us remember that. And all we can do is look back and learn from that. But the oil spill was unlike anything we had ever had. We'd had hurricanes. Of course, Mayor Battle and Congressman Aderholt had to deal with those terrible tornadoes in Alabama that hit, I think, 45 of our 67 counties in 2011, and did an amazing job in helping those communities, their districts, and his city recover from that. But the oil spill was uncharted territory for us. You know, early on, we were told that it was not that bad. We knew there was an explosion. We knew that there had been some people killed, which is tragic. But they early on didn't tell us for the first almost 48 hours that we had a major plume of oil coming up off the ocean floor, the Gulf floor. And we went for days looking in horror. They put underground cameras under the water. They realized that we didn't just have a leak, we had a monster out there. So I would say for me personally, and I actually shared this with the governor a few weeks ago, we were having dinner one night and she said, Joe, if I had told you that we would be dealing with a pandemic in 2020, we'd be dealing with the social unrest that is taking hold throughout the country and some of the other issues that are challenging us, having one of the greatest economies ever, and certainly in Alabama history, and Mayor Battle and his leadership. By the way, Mayor, congratulations. You had a pretty good day on Tuesday. We all want to, I'm sure Congressman Aderholt has had days with, 78% of the vote, but I did not have many in my time in office, that's for sure. But those are the kind of examples, experiences that give you a real education, if you will, not something we studied at the University of Alabama, but an education to prepare you for this. And I guess in looking back on it, I'm grateful that I had those, because as I told the governor when we were having dinner, those experiences have hopefully have helped us be better at the state level, partners working with the cities, and the great leadership we're getting from Mayor Battle, Mayor Maddox, and so many other of our city leaders, county leaders, as well as we're so grateful to have the relationship we've got with our federal delegation, where Katie, you and I spent a lot of time. You certainly were a leader there, and now we're so fortunate to have Congressman Aderholt in the position he's in as one of the, not only the dean of our House delegation in Alabama, but also someone that is one of the most respected voices as a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee, and one day a future chairman.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell you, Congressman Aderholt, we'll jump right in with that. As everyone knows, your leadership is just invaluable in DC as the dean of our delegation. And just as Congressman Bonner just said, I mean, one of the top appropriators on the Hill. We know that people consistently come to you for obviously funding issues and trying to see how we fix these things. And tell us this, I mean, whether it's tornadoes or funding crisis, what has most prepared you for 2020?
Well, thanks, Katie, for being on with you this morning, for the invitation to be with you and to be with the Blackburn Institute. I've known the Blackburn Institute for quite some time, and I know what a great job it does, and so I'm very honored to be a part of this, not only with you, but also with my former colleague in the House, Joe Bonner, and my friend Tommy Battle from Huntsville. So it is an honor to be with you this morning. And by the way, Sam, thank you for the introduction. Sam is actually has interned in our office, and so it was good to see Sam on there. So Sam, good to be with you this morning as well. Let me just say, first of all, it is. I think the pandemic is something, I don't know if anything really can prepare you for it, because it's unlike anything that we've ever had. You know, as you ask that question, my mind goes back to, I was in Washington during 9/11. And of course, trying to respond to that was something that was, the only thing that I can compare of that was nationwide. That really impacted the country nationwide. Obviously, as Joe mentioned and as Mayor Battle mentioned, you've got the hurricanes, you've got you've got tornadoes, you've got things that maybe impact a certain region of a state or a nation. But the pandemic has been something that's been from coast to coast. And I think that's been something that's been very much different from all other crises that we've seen. And that's what makes it stand out as something different. Obviously, just like Joe has dealt with the hurricanes over the years, I have had to deal, and I know that Mayor Battle has had to deal with as well with tornadoes. North Alabama, we don't have many hurricanes, even though I think we had remnants of it yesterday and last night. But they're not the hurricanes that you see down on the coast. They actually end up being more tornadoes and high wind gusts when they come up into the northern part of the state. So it is it's one of those things that is only thing you can compare it to is something like a tornado, a hurricane, and trying to get people help. But you have a lot of people when there's, especially in tornado areas, that are completely unaffected. Their life goes on as normal. The ones that are impacted by the tornado are impacted greatly. But those that are just a few miles over where the tornado didn't impact doesn't even, they go about their day and not even just hear about it on the news. So the pandemic with this has been something that has impacted every single American, not only in the United States, but I really, around the world. So it is something like no other. But obviously it's things like those other issues like that would come up from time to time, hurricanes, tornadoes, even issues like an attack on the country, that somewhat gets you in the same mindset. So I would have to say that while those things have been a good preparation, there's really nothing that I can really compare to, because as Joe mentioned, we all were we don't remember the pandemic that occurred in the first part of last century.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'll tell you too, the continual nature of this and almost everything that we talked about, even H1N1, it seemed that we had it under control or resolved in a certain amount of time, or at least knew a path forward. And the uncertainty of this pandemic obviously is incredibly unique, and obviously the length in which we're dealing with it. I want to ask you all, what do you feel like, given those circumstances, what is the role of government in dealing with this pandemic? You are all uniquely situated, both from a local, state, and federal level. And so I think you have a unique perspective on that, and I'd love for you to share that with us. Congressman Bonner, do you mind jumping in first?
I'll be happy to, Katie. I think the role of government is multifaceted. I think it is to facilitate, it's to coordinate, it's to collaborate, it's to listen, and it's to lead. So in this particular case, if we're going to be successful, and I think we have been in many ways been successful in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot of critics. Critics are like Monday morning quarterbacks after a football game. Everybody can say how they would do it differently and how they would do it better, and maybe they would. But when you're the mayor of a city like Huntsville, the fastest growing city in Alabama, maybe the fastest growing city in the Southeast, and you're trying to manage the economic issues that you're dealing with. Huntsville has led the state in economic growth for year after year. And all of a sudden you have a global pandemic. You got to balance the health and well-being of your citizens and of the people in the communities that come into Huntsville for Huntsville Hospital and all the other healthcare. You've got to manage that and balance it with the livelihood and well-being of the businesses that are being impacted by that. When you're the congressman, as Congressman Aderholt is, representing an entire congressional district and really representing the entire state and nation as one of the leaders in the House, you've got to have even a broader view. And in our role in the governor's office, a lot of it is the collaboration, the coordination. It's listening to our partners in government at every level, listening to what the people are saying they need, taking the resources that we're getting, thanks to Senator Shelby and Congressman Aderholt. Alabama got $1.8 billion in CARES Act that the Congress passed in record time, just in the early days of this pandemic. And now they're working on the fifth. Katie, when you were there with Senator Shelby, I mean, you and I both know Congress really doesn't work fast very often. But I think both Democrats and Republicans understood this was unusual, as Congressman Aderholt said. It was not something we'd ever seen before. So it required extraordinary coordination, cooperation, collaboration. And I do think it's important, not only once you listen to the healthcare experts and you listen to the other people, I would be terribly remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to Katie Britt and the leadership she has provided. BCA, the Business Council of Alabama, represents small businesses, large businesses, all businesses, even if they're not a member. Y'all had a telethon. You got your members out there on public television listening to small business say, we're struggling, we're drowning, we're afraid. The government's come in and told us what we can and can't do, and in some ways shut our businesses down. And so it has been not only to listen, but then once you get that information, it's to do something with it. And I will say this, I'm very proud, I'm a little biased, but what the governor has done working with the Big Ten mayors, Mayor Battle and his colleagues of the 10 largest cities, they've been champions and provided extraordinary leadership. But what we did, she was the first Southern Republican governor to shut our economy down, to shut our beaches down. We shut the beaches down before Florida did, or the Carolinas, or Georgia. She was also the first one to issue a mask order. Now, Mayor Battle and Mayor Maddox, Mayor Stimson down in Mobile, they were out there even ahead of us, Mayor Woodfin of Birmingham. But these are not easy decisions. They're not popular decisions. You don't find anyone who says, man, I like to wear a mask. But it's obvious that it's paying off. And again, Katie, the leadership you provided in helping our businesses help us enforce it. The governor said, I don't want to give people a ticket for not wearing a mask. So we start giving out masks. But the goal is to encourage good social distancing, good responsible health care, use common sense. Let's get through this, and hopefully and prayerfully we'll be getting a vaccine. But all of those things, I think, come to listening and to working with your partners.
Absolutely. And thank you for the leadership that you all have shown. I will say, Mayor Battle, you are uniquely situated, and you've got the layer of the federal government, the state, and then you're there on the local level. Can you talk about your role there in the pandemic and how you've coordinated between all of those various entities?
Sure. I think the most important thing that happened with us was, we're boots on the ground. We're the people who actually see the people who have been hurt by this, and we watch that. We have worked very closely with all of our healthcare providers. Our healthcare providers are Huntsville Hospital, who is the 5th largest system in the United States, public system in the United States. Crestwood Hospital, Alabama Department of Public Health has been a great asset for us. Then we work with our community partners, who is the Chamber of Commerce, Redstone Arsenal, and our local governments, Madison County Commission, the City of Madison, and the City of Huntsville. And we started with our first press conference back February 27th. And if you remember, February 27th was pretty early in this. We had not had a case in Madison County. Our first case was March 16th. But we started coordinating efforts on what we needed to do. We coordinated with the school system, because all of a sudden the school system was going to close. We were going to have some young people who were getting free lunch, reduced and free lunch at school, who weren't going to have the ability to have lunch. And so we had to work to take care of that. We worked we worked with our restaurants, our hospitality industry, which was just decimated by this, because basically we closed them down for several months, and then we started letting them do some takeout service, and then we opened them up, and when we opened them up halfway, but people really weren't ready to come back to them. And so we worked boots on the ground, but the great thing was we also worked in partnership. We worked in partnership. We talked to Joe Bonner on a regular basis, or the governor on a regular basis, and we worked in partnership with them, because they were the stopgap. They were the federal funds came in, and how can we apply those federal funds so that we can address the local problems that we're seeing here. We also worked with our federal partners up there. Robert was one of the federal partners. Of course, Senator Shelby was one of the federal partners. We worked with a full delegation, and what we really needed from the delegation was money. PPP was the most important thing that hit. It kept businesses actually running and kept businesses from folding up and filing bankruptcy. And we needed a vaccine from the federal government, and and they're working on that. We hear news on that daily. But the biggest thing is, we were very fortunate. Early on, we were one of the most successful communities in the COVID fight, all the way up to probably June 1st. Once the holiday hit and June 1st and we opened up, everybody thought that it was ollie ollie ends free and that we're all going to be able to do whatever we wanted to. Then our cases started climbing. I mean, we had about 300 cases up to June 1st, and then we were up at 5,000 cases in July. And we put in the masking ordinance. The ABC closed down our local establishments. You can't sell alcohol past 11 o'clock. That's blunted our curve. That's made our curve go downward, so that we're back in the success mode of this. But it's it takes coordination from everybody. It takes coordination from all your governments, and this has been an effort of everybody pitching in, trying to make sure that we affect that one person who is sitting on the ground in Huntsville, Alabama, that they don't, that they have a less likely a chance of catching COVID-19, or if they do catch it, that we have protocols in place that we can cure it as quickly as possible. And we're looking for light at the end of the tunnel, which is a vaccine.
I'll tell you, the Mask Up Huntsville and the leadership that has been shown by y'all's entire community is unique. Congressman Aderholt, I have a question. With your role, obviously you are United States Congressman from Alabama, but you also obviously are a United States Congressman. And so you're having to look at this both from an Alabama lens and the lens from across the country. Can you tell us what role you've played? I know Congressman Bonner alluded to it, but seeing how quickly you all work to make sure that you infused capital into our country and help people get through this was truly remarkable. I know that we all look from afar and assume that everything we see on TV about relationships and tension in DC is exactly right, but it seems that everyone was able to come together for the common good and making sure that we kept our country moving forward. And so we'd love to just hear a little bit about your perspective on role in government with regards to the pandemic.
Yeah, no, I think Joe hit it right on the nail on the head when he mentioned that it was just remarkable how quickly Congress came together. And Joe knows firsthand, because of all the time he's spent in Washington, things don't happen that quickly normally. To have a pandemic that really, it was February, first part of March before it was really labeled a pandemic. And then by the end of March to have legislation signed at $2.2 trillion passed by the House and the Senate and the President is really remarkable. And I think it was a sign that things were really sort of really moving at a fast pace and with this pandemic, and we didn't have time to wait. Normally, Congress will wait around and try to wait until the last minute to do something, just because obviously there's so many dissenting opinions. But this was one of those situations where everybody came together, and really it was a strong vote for this legislation. And voting for any bill that's $2.2 trillion is remarkable. Now, when I throw around the term trillion, we in Washington we use that term a lot, but it's really for the average American and for any of us individually. $1 trillion is an amazing amount of money, and I always like to use this example, and hopefully those on this video conference call can appreciate this. I first heard this example used when we were far from the $1 trillion debt that we had, the trillions of dollar debt that we have now. But it's million is one thing. It's hard to get the concept of $1 million. It is hard to get the concept of a $1 billion for most of us, and unless you're Jeff Bezos or something. But otherwise, trying to get your mind around $1 billion. But you go to $1 trillion, it is really, really difficult. You think you might understand how much $1 trillion is, but the example that I've always liked to use, that I've shared with many groups, is the one about if to give you some idea of what $1 trillion is, if you and I had been living the day that Jesus was born in Nazareth over 2,000 years ago, born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, and when he was born down in Bethlehem, that the day that he was born, we had walked over to the First National Bank of Bethlehem, say, and we had deposited in an account $1 million. And then the day when Jesus was 1 day old, we walked over and did another $1 million. And then the third day, another $1 million. And the fourth day, another $1 million. And have continued this every day for over 2,000 years, put $1 million in the bank every day until August the 29th, 2020, here we are today. It would not be $1 trillion. And I think that's what, as a matter of fact, it'd be quite a bit less than $1 trillion. So this is a $2.2 trillion piece of legislation. So when you really understand it, at least from my perspective, when I understand it from that way, it is amazing that Congress quickly passes legislation. But let me go on. And I think I made my point about how much $1 trillion is. But one thing that I want to say is that I think that people needed help immediately. And having this paycheck protection program, which is referred to as the PPP, for small businesses, so they could allow their employees to stay employed and getting a paycheck, even if they work, was invaluable to keep the economy running. Also, it was geared for those companies 500 people or less. So it was really tried to help these small mom and pop businesses, of course, larger businesses as well, but certainly these small mom and pop operations across the country that could not afford, they could not sell their products, they couldn't have people to come into their stores, and the only thing was to do was to lay off their employees. So this was a way to help that. Also, the stimulus check for $1,200 was certainly something that we knew we had to stimulate the economy. We couldn't let the economy just grind to a halt, and allowing people to be able to buy some of the things they needed that otherwise they might not be able to afford, again, vitally important. And of course, the unemployment benefits for in the $600 additional. Now, that was probably the most controversial aspect of it, because they were a lot of people, and they were getting more money than they were making in the first place. And I think that's a very legitimate criticism of the bill. I think the one mistake that Congress did was rapidly doing this. And anytime you do a rapid bill, I mean, or anytime you do any legislation, you're going to have issues and you're going to have problems. You're going to overlook something. But what the real reason for doing this $600, and a lot of people saying, you know, that's way more than really some were making beforehand. They were trying to figure out a formula that where we're not giving some states more money than others, and sort of just trying to come up with an overall formula. And they came up with the number 600 to be fair, so that New York residents wouldn't be getting more money than Alabama residents. So we're trying to come with a formula that treated every individual fairly, no matter where you lived. And so that's how they came up with that $600. And of course, now we look at it and say, you know, and that's where one of the problems have been in trying to extend this is there's part of the Congress, the Democrats really want to extend the 600. Republicans say, you know, people need to get back to work. And a lot of people are not going back to work because they're receiving more than they were with their unemployment checks and this $600 additional. But the bottom line is, I think this really was remarkable legislation. This what was called the CARES Act. Everybody knows the first as the CARES Act. It was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act was what it was actually labeled. But that has been, I think, one of the pieces of legislation that will go down as history that has really made an impact on every single person in this country.
No, and I'll tell you, you alluded to it. You will, if you take a look at a full piece of legislation, you can always find something that you would like to do differently, but it is imperative that our leaders get together and figure it out. And I tell people all the time, you never get 100% of what you want. And if you do, there's likely something wrong with that. So thank you for your leadership and working to figure out a best path forward. We have a question from a fellow that says, in hindsight, this is actually from Kate Fountain. Kate, I hope you're doing wonderfully. Kate says, looking back, are there any decisions you would have made differently in response to COVID with the knowledge that you have now? I think it's ironic, I've said this many times, that 2020 hindsight, you know, is the year and what we're doing now. We'd love to know from you, Mayor Battle, if you'll start. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently? We got to get you unmuted. There you go. There you go. Now you're ready.
In looking back at it, we started early on this, and we started as early, I think, as our population would take it, because when we started and we quarantined and everybody went to their homes and pretty much stayed at home for those two and a half months, you know, we ended up at the end of it, we only had 316 cases of COVID-19. Everybody was saying, what's the big deal? Why are we doing this? And then we found out real quick why we were doing it. But one of the things that you've got to realize in this is that you have got to work with the population. You have got to educate the population. You've got to make them understand the ramifications of not doing some of the processes that you're doing, not putting on a mask, and not making sure that everybody washes their hands, stays sanitized, stays separated. What are the ramifications to your hospitals? What is the ramification to somebody who is going to have to go into ICU? What's the ramification if everybody, that we have a lot of cases, and the very first cases that are all on vents, then we don't have enough vents for everybody else. Part of that is education. And that's one of the things that was the hardest thing to do with our population. I know that Joe Bonner and the governor had the same task, and it was just hard for them to do too, because they had the whole state. But we had to keep hammering in time and time and time again that that if we don't do this, we're going to see something. We're going to see a health system that falls down. We're going to overrun our health system. We're not going to have the healthcare workers to take care of these people who are really sick and in the hospitals. And as you go through that, that's the most important thing that you've got to do as an elected officials is to try to educate the public, and part of education is explaining to them why this is so important. That worked out very well for us. As we looked through it, we did flu and fever clinics where the population went to flu and fever clinic, which was kind of drive-through, and didn't get into the emergency room, so that you didn't have your emergency room just overflowing with people who would shed the virus and others would get it. We put in drive-through testing. We went to some of the low-income areas to do drive-through testing. All those proved out to be good things to be done for our area and kept our numbers low for a long, long time. The biggest thing that you've got to do through this, and I think you've got to plan, and you've got to plan early. You can't plan the day that it all of a sudden hits. You've got to have a plan that is in place from day one. You've got to have some continuity of your leadership. You've got to know your leadership very well. I think there was one thing we could have done a little bit more. We could have spread out some of our efforts and spread them into 2, 3, 4 counties, because we had counties all around us that got hit pretty hard. And some of those lessons learned in those 4 counties, maybe we could have spread those over to the others and helped with their education, with their communication, with keeping people masked, keeping people separated, et cetera. With those other areas. That is the only place I see that I think we could have jumped on it a little bit earlier to do that.
And Mayor Battle, while we're talking about this, we have another question from a fellow specifically about you having to navigate everything you were navigating with the pandemic, and also running a campaign. How can you talk just briefly about that? That question from Justin Brandon.
Sure. You know, running a campaign in COVID, in a COVID environment, is a totally different campaign than I've ever run, and I think that we will ever run in our lives again. Instead of having neighborhood meetings, we would normally, in a course of a campaign, have 40 neighborhood meetings. We had Zoom meetings, and at the end of the day, everybody was a little bit tired of Zoom. You could tell that they had zoomed out almost, but. You know, and you didn't have rallies, so you had to have signs up. You did a lot more social media in your campaign than you did before. You did a lot more justification too, because there's some people, you know, I don't like wearing a mask. A mask is hot and everything else, but I do it because I know I need to do it. I know it's a better thing to do for our society. And there's a lot of people out there who have that same feeling, and they said, "Why do I have to wear a mask?" There was a lot of justification in this campaign to talk about why we did it. We started back in March. We started daily news conferences, trying to educate the public what was going on, why we were doing things, what our numbers were. What was successful, what was unsuccessful, and we walked through that whole process. We'd have somebody from our healthcare industry, either one of the hospital execs or Alabama Department of Public Health, one of the local elected officials, and we were able to put the questions to bed. We were able to give them answers. Giving them answers is a little much better than having someone sitting home trying to think up answers and trying to figure it out, because most of the time when you don't have answers, you kind of skew towards the negative. So right. We did that. It worked out very well, and it worked out very well for.
As Congressman Bonner said, 78%. That's impressive. So obviously you did an excellent job. When we're talking about campaigns in a pandemic, I also think of the census, and obviously Congressman Aderholt, with your role. As you all know, he is the chairman of Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee. The Commerce Department and all things census fall under that. Obviously, Congressman Bonner, with everything that you're doing, or that's Congressman Aderholt, Congressman Bonner, with everything that you're doing in the state to get our census numbers up. Do the two of you mind just talking briefly about how the pandemic has changed that, where we are currently, and let's just do a little PSA real quick to everybody on here to encourage them to not only fill it out themselves, but have their friends fill it out. Do Congressman, one of y'all just jump on in on that?
Happy to jump in as far as from my perspective. And I know, and I will just say, the governor and Joe's perspective on this is their work on this is where it rubber meets the road, so to speak. It's congressional standpoint, but the states have got, they have, that's where it all happens. But let me just, in regard to the census overall, when we started funding for the census back even last year, there was no indication that they would have any pandemic. So that was not part of the plan. It's always a very, touch and go when you do a census, because you have a limited amount of time to try to touch base with every person that's in the United States. And oddly enough, the census day for 2020 was scheduled way before the pandemic. And of all days, it was April the 1st, just right after the pandemic got started. So obviously there had to be some changes. I have been on meetings and calls regarding the census and how we've moved forward with it. One thing that before the census was really got started last year, I brought the director of the census, the national director for the census, down to Alabama because I wanted to, certainly show how important it was for Alabama to make sure that we keep our numbers as high as possible. Obviously, and you've alluded to it, Katie, but we're in a very vital situation right now, whereas that our population of our state determines, number one, the federal funding that we get for our state on a federal level. And certainly the more people we have, the more we're eligible, and we're competing with other states on that. And number two is the number of our congressional delegation. Since the 1960 census, we have maintained 7 congressional districts, and that is in jeopardy this year. We need to make sure that we count every single person. I'm convinced that if we do count every single person possible, then we can maintain those 7 congressional seats and maintain the population that we really have. Alabama, in my understanding, is not necessarily, we're not losing population. And as Joe mentioned, up in Huntsville, Tommy's leading a city that is one of the fastest growing in the region, not only in the state. And so we're growing in the state of Alabama, but obviously we have to keep up with the growth of on the national average. And that's where we are falling short, so to speak, and making sure that we maintain our 7 congressional districts. So the pandemic really has really hampered that effort to some extent, and obviously it's caused people, I think, to not focus so much on the census and focus so much on the pandemic. It was interesting how we there were times I would even forget about the census going on this year because of the pandemic was sucking up all the oxygen out of the room. But it is certainly important that we don't lose sight that we do everything we can between now and when the census is closed to make sure every individual is counted. And since I know that we have a lot of college students that may be on this call, I just want to remind everyone that the census takes into account every single person that's living inside the state of Alabama during 2020 and during this time. If you are living in the state of Alabama, whether you're a student or whether you're just temporarily working in the state of Alabama, then you're to be counted on the Alabama census. Now, obviously, you're some other, I always like to tell people that We may not count somebody if they're just driving through the state of Alabama and just stop to get gas. But otherwise, if you're spending most of your time in the state of Alabama, then you need to be, and that's where you consider your home right now. Then you need to be counted in the state of Alabama.
That's right. We want all of these students to call this home, not only for their college career, but we want to keep this talent in the state after they graduate too. So you are exactly right.
A lot of people like say, well, their parents will like count them back in their home state. But if they are living in an apartment or a dorm or whatever, count Alabama as your home.
That's right. That's right. No, and thank you for your leadership on that. I'll tell you, obviously, Congressman Bonner, you all have done such a great job on a state level getting the word out. And as Congressman Aderholt mentioned, obviously, congressional seats, federal funding, federal benefits, SNAP benefits, housing. There are just a plethora of things, Medicaid, that come down from our numbers. And there's an economic development portion too, which the mayor knows all too well. People, when they want to either open restaurants or retail or bring a manufacturing entity into a state, they take a look at those numbers. And so those numbers will be with us for the next 10 years. And so we really have to step up our game. Congressman Bonner, I'd love to get your thoughts on the earlier question with regards to looking back. Is there anything that you would have done differently in the pandemic era? And then also we have a question from fellow Elliot Knight, and hi Elliot, about your thoughts on local and state revenues and the budget implications in the coming years. I mean, obviously we have this robust federal funding right now, but when that ends, and it will end, and it's exhausted, what do you see coming down the pipe there? So two questions there, looking back, anything that you would do different, and then to the funding implications in the future.
Katie, I'm going to be like Congressman Aderholt. I've got to take an advantage of this moment and also talk about the census very briefly. If you are a student at the University of Alabama, and everyone on this call either is a student or is affiliated with the Blackburn Institute at the University of Alabama, please help us. Everyone on this call, every student at the University of Alabama should be, and you can go online, it takes less than 10 minutes. And it is worth billions of dollars to the state of Alabama. Whether it's your adopted home for just a few years, or whether we hope, as Katie said, we can convince you to make it your permanent home. This is critically important. Losing a seat in Congress would be devastating to the influence that we have. But losing the billions of dollars that we would get each year that would go to some other state is just almost unacceptable. So forgive me, but I've got to plug that because we've got just a few days left till the end of September. And as Congressman Aderholt said, no one predicted when we started the census. The census goes back to the early days of the very first Congress, to the Continental Congress. They said, we're going to count every person in this country. And there's some debate about whether we're counting citizens or illegal citizens, and that's for the courts and someone else to resolve. But it goes back to the founding days of our country that we get an accurate head count, and that's why the census is so important. Okay, would we do things differently? Absolutely. I know that there are a dozen things that I could probably speak to today that would be examples of things that I wish we could have done differently. One thing as a nation, I wish we could have done differently, but of course it's impossible to do it, is to not box ourselves in. Early on, Dr. Fauci, who's a genius. I mean, this is one of the foremost medical minds in America, going back to his work in HIV/AIDS back in the 1980s. Dr. Deborah Birx, the team that President Trump and Vice President Pence has assembled, the medical team, is nothing short of an all-star lineup. But even they have said things early on, you don't need to wear masks. Well, then when you come out and say you need to wear a mask, as Mayor Battle alluded to, none of us want to wear a mask. But the more we've learned about this over the days and weeks that have passed, the easier it has been to adapt to new policies. But I do wish, in hindsight, that collectively we could have not made so many definitive statements that this works or this doesn't work. We didn't know. It was a novel virus, even though we've had the coronavirus for centuries. We've never had COVID-19. And so this was a novel virus. I wish as a society we had not made so many definitive statements early on. In terms of the revenues, Elliot, that's a great question. We are very fortunate in Alabama, thanks to the leadership of our legislature, thanks to the hard work of our finance director, and working in close partnership with the leaders like Mayor Battle and the other leaders around the state. We have been very fortunate really over the last several years of conservative budgeting, while at the same time, Katie, as you know, working with you and trying to tee up a budget, this was the year we were getting ready to swing for the fences. Our unemployment rate in Alabama in February was 2.7%, which is unheard of, 2.7%. We really had a problem because we had more jobs than we had people looking for work. So we were trying to recruit people to come in from other states, and we're still going to be doing that because of the great things going on in Huntsville and in Mobile and in Tuscaloosa and all these other great cities of ours. We're going to bounce back. Our revenue projections were delayed, much like the census was, and we actually didn't get those numbers until the middle of July. And to our great surprise, and I am shocked by this, our numbers were actually up over where they were projected to be. Now, we've had a dip in the education account, but it's still going to be within just a few $1 million of breaking even. So that's the good news for this year. But to Elliot's question, the real concern is, when do we come out of this? When does the vaccine come online? Are we preparing ourselves, and we better be, to make sure that when we get a vaccine that we can distribute it, that we've got confidence in it, and that it does the wonders of what a vaccine can do. But we also have to be prepared for the fact that while I think our economy in Alabama is better than most of our sister southeastern states, there are still some scars underneath that we're going to have to deal with. And I think going forward, we had a call the governor did yesterday with our legislative leadership, the Speaker of the House from up in Mayor Battle's area near Huntsville, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Greg Reed, who's in Congressman Aderholt's district in Walker County in Jasper, and several of our legislative leaders. And we started talking about the fact that we're going to start working on the budget for the next year, really in the next few weeks. And it's going to be critically important that we do budget projections based on an acknowledgement that this has had a major impact, a negative impact on our economy. It's not as bad as we thought it was going to be, but we have to be prepared for what might happen, because we don't know what's going to happen not only with the vaccine, we also don't know what's going to happen with our national economy. There are some really positive signs out there that we're going to come back roaring. But there are also some reasons to be concerned about that, because we don't know what's going to happen on November 3rd, and we don't know what's going to happen next year either.
Well, I'll tell you, we only have about 10 more minutes, and we have some excellent questions. I'm going to do my very best to roll them into one. I want to tell you a couple of the things I want to cover in these 10 minutes. And I want to talk, Congressman Aderholt, I want to talk with you a little bit about broadband. You have obviously done such an incredible job making sure that that is first and foremost on everyone's mind. Obviously, the governor has done incredible things with the $100 million for connectivity to students, and so want to get into that. Congressman Aderholt, additionally, you sent out a letter to your constituency that talked about some of the big changes or success stories that industry had within your district to make sure that they were retooling or whatnot for COVID. And Mayor Battle, I tell you what, thank you so much for being a part of the BCA's Engage Alabama with the, the 5 big mayors. You were quoted there and talking, you were quoted in Alabama Daily News and Yellowhammer, also on TV from that segment where you talked about, how innovative the businesses in your area have been and how they have learned to adapt and change and retool. And you said change their entire marketing strategy, and it has been very impressive. Quote, they created solutions rather than looking at it as a problem. And so wanted to see if you wouldn't mind just sharing some of those success stories briefly here for the whole group. And I've got you on mute. Sorry about that. Let's see. And Mayor Battle, while you're unmuting, also another question that came, we have, is just about the hostility that we see in our communities sometimes, and particularly in elected officials. When you do that success story, will you also talk briefly about how well the 5 big mayors work with each other, You're obviously across party lines and obviously on different ends of the state. And I'd love for you to just talk briefly about that as well. And I know we only have about 8 minutes now total, so.
Okay, I'll go quick. We are blessed with the other mayors across the state. We started off with the big 5 mayors, and we started meeting and talking about best practices, what we could do, boots on the ground stuff. So this is not Republican, not Democrat. It's all just better policies for your community, and we started implementing those. And out of that, our police chief started meeting. Out of that, planners started meeting. Our accountants our finance director started meeting. And we've been able to put in place some of the best practices across the state of what needs to be done. And as we've done that, I think it's made the whole state better. It's made each one of our communities better. When we start talking about the businesses here in Huntsville, our businesses learn to adapt. They learn to change. They learn to modify their revenue stream as to what they needed. And we had our restaurants learned how to make a living off of selling things through the drive-through windows and having pickup dinners and all the other things that you do. But that's the strength of the business world out there right now, is adapt and change, and you have to move and you have to change to fit what's going on in society right now. And I think the final thing I'd like to say is, the Blackburn Institute could play a big part of this. This won't be the last time that we see a virus come through or a pandemic come through. Best practices need to be gathered after we get finished, an after action report that gets together the best practices. Best practices need to be gathered on census data, how to collect census data and who did the best and what other communities might have missed, because that's going to happen again in 10 years. You come into office as a mayor and you look around and say, where are my files? Where's my file on the last time we had COVID-19? Or where's my file last time we had a virus? And we keep those files in place. Blackburn Institute could play a very big part in bringing those to the state and putting those with the state. So the next time we have something like this, we've got a playbook to go by. And the playbook would be very, very helpful for mayors throughout this community, throughout the state.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Congressman Aderholt, do you mind talking about the need for broadband and some of the things that you've been doing through COVID to ensure that our citizens, particularly in some of the most rural parts of the state, have that access?
Well, I think we have all known the last several years that broadband has a very big priority for not only the state, but for in this, over the last 2 or 3 years, most of the larger cities across in the urban areas and even suburban areas have had access to broadband, and that's becoming more and more available as time has gone over the last 2 or 3 years. What has not kept up with that pace is rural America, and that certainly goes for rural Alabama as well. And I think I was fortunate enough to work with some of my colleagues and also some of my constituents to try to find a plan to provide broadband for rural Alabama. And of course, I heard from my colleagues from other states that this was an issue that was very big to them. We think of states like Wisconsin and New York and even California as places that are not rural. There are rural parts of those states that I would say would really be more rural than parts of Alabama. So those are areas, there's places all over the country that need broadband. So that's one thing that we knew needed to be done, and we've been working on that. However, COVID brought it up to a new level. When children couldn't go to school any longer and didn't have access to education, and they didn't have rural broadband because coronavirus hit rural America just like it did the urban areas. And so from that standpoint, it was important that we get it everywhere. So the one thing that I think COVID has been a positive, if you look at it that way, is that it has shown the need that broadband is something we need for all America and not just the larger cities and suburban areas.
That's right, Congressman, and we really appreciate you continuing to be a leader on that. And like you said, whether it's the gap between the have and have-nots when we went to this virtual learning, and people who we saw that disparity continue to grow, telemedicine, and as we have our rural hospitals closed, the need that has increased for that, and then the very people that need it are not having the access they need. And then from a business perspective, I mean, in 2020, you can't do business unless you can swipe that card or do Apple Pay, which I just learned to do. I'm very proud of myself. So certainly we really appreciate your leadership and helping make sure that Alabama is where it needs to be on that. Congressman Bonner, we obviously have talked a lot about the public health crisis and even the economic issues that we are facing as a state and a nation, but we would be remiss if we did not talk about the civil unrest with regards to systemic racism in our country. I'd like for you to talk about some of the leadership that Governor Ivey has shown. It has truly been remarkable, and I think a lot of people are unaware of all of the various efforts that are going on to listen and learn and to move our state forward. So do you mind just talking about that for a few minutes?
Katie, thanks for that acknowledgement, and also thanks for letting me speak about this for an important, for a brief moment, because it has intertwined. During this global pandemic, we've also had a national conversation and really a national display of fears, frustrations, anger, confusion about what is happening all over our country. So back in January, on January 17th, going into Dr. King's birthday weekend, Governor Ivey invited 65 of Alabama's most prominent African-American leaders to come to Montgomery to spend the morning with her at the Blunt home, which is the estate out by the Shakespeare Festival that Wynton Red Blunt left to the state of Alabama. She invited 65. We had 59 people come. I mean, these are generals, bank presidents, doctors, Dean Selwyn Vickers at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, the Dean of Medicine, Tim Vines, the president of Blue Cross Blue Shield, who's on your board, Katie. These are incredible leaders. And she convened that meeting to begin a conversation. What can we do to make certain that the African-American community in Alabama feels that they have an equal seat at the table and is helping us come up with solutions? Because we're beginning our third century in Alabama. We just celebrated our bicentennial last December. And she thought, what better time, this is before COVID, or before the racial unrest, what better time to bring this group of leaders together and say, we need your help to chart our course for our next century. And I will tell you, looking back on that day and those conversations, it's a lot of good seeds were planted and a lot of good ideas have come from that. fast forward to the tragedy with George Floyd, and the whole nation was in horror over what happened. And we have been working very closely with the Legislative Black Caucus in the state legislature. Katie, you brought your entire executive committee of the BCA board, and thank you for that. But you brought them together to listen to the Legislative Black Caucus. We brought our law enforcement leaders, the head of the state law enforcement agencies, the head of the Sheriff's Association. Mayor Battle had his police chief involved in this. We're talking about what can we do to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that some of our sister states in Minnesota and Washington State and Illinois and some of the other states and some of these cities have made. And so it was a great way to begin a dialogue long before any of these other issues had surfaced. And I think it is going to prepare us so that when we go into the legislative session next February, we're going to have a package of legislation dealing with access to minority capital. And again, Katie, John Turner, the president of Regions Bank, who's on your board, is helping us lead that conversation. How can we make sure that you talk about rural health care? How can we focus on rural health care, especially in the African American community and other minority communities? So the governor, I'm not going to say she was a prophet, but she certainly realized that as we were beginning our new century as a state, we needed to be planning for the future for an Alabama that is all inclusive, that's all in. And I think that we're going to see some really good things come from that. Thank you for that question.
Yes, well, and thank you for your continued leadership on that and everything that you all have been doing from the start of 2020 to address those issues. So thank you. I will say it is time to wrap up. So we're going to do one last question, and I am so excited. It is from Mike House. Mike, Gina, I hope that you all are wonderful. And we're so glad that you joined us. So Mike's question is, what is our greatest challenge going forward? And so we will leave on that note. That'll be our last question. And let's see, who would like to start? Congressman Aderholt, go ahead, go, Mayor Battle, let's go, you got it.
I think our biggest challenge, two things. Number one is workforce. Workforce, and before COVID, we were 2.7% unemployment. We've got more jobs than we have people to fill them. The Blackburn Institute people, if you will need a job, please come to Huntsville. We'd love to have you here and working in our community. But that's going to be a key thing. We've got to train our people who are here to take the jobs that are coming in. But we're also going to have to go out and recruit people to come to our community to fill these jobs that are coming in. Number two is continue to work on bringing our communities together. The summer of unrest has been one that's challenged each of us and challenged every community. We've got to continue that conversation and to continue the conversation about how we get better at bringing groups together and making sure everybody's at the table of prosperity. So those are the two issues I see that we've got to work on.
Congressman Aderholt, to Mike's question, what do you think our biggest challenge is going forward?
Well, as you know, there is a lot of challenges in Washington. So, but let me just narrow it down as far as in light of coronavirus and a lot of COVID-19 and for our country and how we can move forward. Obviously, trying to get a vaccine, I think, is one challenge that we have before us right now that the president is working very diligently on, and his team, and making sure that these pharmaceutical companies are doing everything they can to move forward on it. I think the immediate concern, obstacle, challenge that we have right now is moving forward on some kind of what's the next phase for a stimulus package. And as you know, that has Congress, as much as we bragged on Congress earlier, as we talked about how Congress really came together to try to find a solution and did it very quickly. Continuing that has been much more challenging. And I think one of the reasons is because the coronavirus has not quite the unknown that it was back in March. I think that it's now, while it's not stopped, I think it's subsided in some areas, and we sort of have a handle on it better, and we know how to deal with it a little more. So that's caused the Congress on the partisan levels not to work together quite as closely. And right now there are the Democrats and Republicans are way far apart. 3 to 4 trillion for the Democrats, $1 to $1.5 trillion is the limit for the Republicans. And obviously there are some things we still need to do, but right now it's there's no really agreement that's in sight. And so for that reason, I think that's going to be the challenge for the fall for us in trying to figure out how we try to wrap this thing up as we get a vaccine.
No, absolutely. I know between heroes and heels and everything in between, certainly appreciate your leadership and the work that you're continuing to do there in DC. We're going to end with you, Congressman Bonner. To Mike House's question, what do you think our greatest challenge is moving forward?
So I know Gina is a capstone woman. I've heard Mike House's name, but I can't place him. I think he might be the longest serving member of the Blackburn Institute or something like that. Mike and Gina, it's good to see y'all. I think it's really to take all of the lessons and experiences of this year when we get to the end of it, and this pandemic when we get to the end of that, and turn these challenges that we've had to deal with without any organized, prepared way to deal with them into an amazing opportunity to make certain that when we go into the next chapter of this, that we've learned lessons, as Mayor Battle said, that we do our action after action reports and make sure that the next mayor of Huntsville and the next governor of Alabama and the next leaders have these lessons recorded for them to learn from, but that we seize this moment of opportunity. Alabama is in a great place. Our economy is going to come back roaring strong. We've got a diversified economy. We've got so many great things going on. We can't forget those who feel left behind, those who've been injured or damaged. But I think this is going to be an incredible opportunity for us to use these experiences to prepare for an exciting, bright decade and hopefully decades to come. And I just I know I would be terribly remiss if I didn't say thank you to the Blackburn Institute. You honor the life of one of the great education leaders of all time, John L. Blackburn, by being members of the Institute, something you'll be proud of. And it's the ultimate fraternity and sorority. You'll be a part of that network for the rest of your lives. And I know that you will be doing great things to help build a better state, a better nation, and a better world. So, Katie, thanks for letting me join two of my favorite people in elected office, Mayor Tommy Battle, one of the great leaders of our state, and my good friend and colleague, Congressman Robert Aderholt. And I will tell you all, I think Katie is an alumni of the Blackburn Institute, if I'm not mistaken. And you better keep your eye on Katie Britt. She is not only a leader today, she's going to be doing great things for our state for years and decades to come. We'll be the beneficiaries of that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I don't think we could have said it better with regards to everybody who has joined. I want to thank our panelists. As we mentioned at the beginning, 3 of the top leaders that we have in our state, and they took their time and energy to be here on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And all of us that are part of the Blackburn Institute are truly grateful, not only for your time today, but your continued service and your willingness to talk through these things with us this morning. So thank you for what you do and for being here with us. And then to all of the fellows and people watching, we appreciate you being part of this panel and listening and tuning in, and your questions, and for what you're doing, not only in campus, but on campus, but throughout our state. So with that, I will close and turn it back over. Do you all have any announcements for next things? And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this and allowing me to join such an esteemed panel.